What can faculty and staff do about the attacks on higher education?
There's a variety of things that one can do, depending upon the situation on your campus. One would be to organize faculty and staff who stand together's values of promoting academic freedom, free from political or financial interference, and to encourage public discussion on their own campuses. Um, Teams could host events related to higher education and academic freedom, such as a teach-in. We have one that's going to be coming up this fall that we're going to be rolling out with the collaboration of the AAUP at universities and colleges around the country. So even getting together to share experiences like that can help faculty and staff feel like they're not alone. We can be encouraging people to write op-eds or policy statements, or to write their legislators and community partners. Faculty and staff could be gathering stories about impact, but also about all of the good that higher education does for our country. We know that higher education helps fuel our economy, and we know that when the national science infrastructure is damaged in the way that it is, discovery stalls, and our nation's reputation and its ability to affect change in the world diminishes in some ways. So that damage to our economy is something that we're really trying to head off. We could be promoting and modeling the importance of reaching across whatever aisles separate us. I'm a sociologist. I study how people come together and what breaks them apart. And in how we study relationships, we know that reaching out to someone who is not like you in some capacity is often a difficult thing to do, but there's so much reward in building a diverse social network and a thickly intertwined network of people that can collectively enact some end goal. But I think at the end, it's about students. It's about the next generation of learners, and really listening to them and their thoughts and their concerns about higher education. So I think regardless of what state one is in, whether one's at a 2-year school or at a 4-year school, private or public, there's a huge variety that local teams can be doing.
Yeah, and Mark, you said something there that I want to pick up on two parts of, which was that the ability and the power that faculty and staff have to speak out versus the administration of a college or university. And let's start with the faculty and staff piece of that, because a tenured faculty member, as I understand it, is different in this scenario or in this capacity than a faculty member who does not have tenure, than someone who is a staff member and not faculty at all. So I wonder if you could just walk through those distinctions and the extent to which it impacts one's ability to speak out on behalf of the institution.
I'll step in here simply because I've thought about this a great deal. I'm sure Mark has too. But when Jen Lundquist and I co-founded and launched Stand Together for Higher Ed in early June, we did so out of our experience with having led a letter campaign that launched in late March, when Columbia was under its first encounter with the federal administration. And at that time, we were asking in that letter, and we had a number of people from across the country and colleagues here at UMass Amherst collaborating together to write this letter. And we were writing directly to leaders of the 60 institutions that had been named in the OCR letter from the Department of Education as targets for investigation and perhaps punitive action for anti-Semitism. Now, in that letter that we wound up getting more than 5,000 signatures from faculty, mostly tenured faculty at institutions all over the country, a few from outside the country too, that we learned some things. When we put that letter together, we were so fearful about anyone signing that letter who was not tenured, that our call was particularly, we didn't exclude non-tenured. It was only the faculty. We did not exclude non-tenured faculty, but we made a point to say, please consider your risk very closely when you are considering signing this letter. Since then, we maintain these concerns, but we heard from so many staff who wanted to be part of whatever came next after that letter. And so when we were talking through creating Stand Together for Higher Ed with each other and our colleagues like Mark, we said, you've got to open this to staff. Staff on college campuses around this country they serve and build the mission of the institution. And so many are so important to our students' lives and their success and their livelihood and to our own happiness and our own work, that we wanted to open things up. But we are we ask everyone who signs up for Stand Together for Higher Ed to think about their risk. We instruct members who are creating Stand Together teams on their campuses to think very carefully about who could be the lead and out there as the public face and voice of the Stand Together team on their campus, and make sure that that person is either has some degree of protection based on their position, or, fully understands the risk. Mark, what else would you say?
I would just say it's, I think, incumbent upon those of us who do have those job protections to be allies and to put ourselves forward in order to stand up. I think, Jenna, the initial question that you asked of, what are some of these distinctions and gradations, for some of your listenership who might not be familiar, there's a probationary period for faculty that is usually 5, 6, 7 years, something like that.
So we have the, faculty and staff, but then there's the administration. So how are you all and the folks you're working with thinking about that? Like, how is there pressure to be applied to administrators and administrations that might have this feeling? And if so, what might some of those pressure points be?
I think Mark points to this, and your question too, Jenna. It's like the prisoner's dilemma for leaders of higher ed institutions at the moment. That is, it's really hard to act collectively and for the collective good when the some of these attacks work on a divide and conquer kind of strategy, which is very effective. And so, institutions are afraid of being the next target, and for very good reason, because we have seen what the punitive actions do, and how powerful state action at the federal and state level has been. And so, what I would say is that, certainly, I think that a lot of faculty and staff don't see what their administrations are doing. It's really hard. The messaging has been constrained as well in terms of institutional administrations kind of trumpeting out to the world everything that they're doing to serve their missions and their faculty and their students and their staff. But they, certainly at UMass Amherst and in the UMass system, we know that they are doing an incredible amount and working incredibly hard in concert with the Office of General Counsel, the president of the UMass system, the governor, the attorney general. So you see right now in the state of California, you see the entire UC system and the state government collectively working together. And so there's just so much that is happening. What I think when we think of what Stand Together for Higher Ed can do, and this has been something we've thought about from the very beginning, is we, faculty and staff, working collectively across the country in teams of our own institution, but also with each other, we can help clear the way. We can do things that institutions can't do themselves. We can ask each other to be involved in contacting legislators. We can ask each other to engage in this, what we're calling the Reclaim the Narrative campaign, which we're launching this fall, as Mark mentioned, with the AAUP. This is going to be a faculty and staff teach-in with the goal of everyone engaging in public messaging about why the value of higher ed, how higher ed is indeed a public good. It's for the common good, and it is well worth our defending. We know from recent public opinion polls, including the UMass poll, which our colleagues have done, that there's a great deal of support for higher ed and a great deal of anxiety out there in the public about what's happening with these attacks on institutions and these punitive measures. And so, I think that public messaging is really important. So is this, outreach to legislators, and there's more we can do collectively.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned outreach to legislators. That's actually where I wanted to go next. And so I know that some of that has been happening, at least here at Penn State. Our government relations team has been meeting with both our state legislature and our federal representatives in Washington. So what are the levers that can be pulled there, or those points of commonality maybe, or how can this work be presented in a way that might be appealing and effective to legislators, given the incentives and the structures that they have to operate within?
What we understand from discussions we've had on our national leadership team and others is that that kind of what you just described is happening at institutions and all over this country with state legislatures and with their federal delegations. And so that work is well underway because in every state there are institutions that are trying to keep the federal research dollars flowing, that are trying to protect Pell Grants, that are trying to protect financial aid, and trying to, maintain, this piece of the higher ed, student access and research funding. There are other areas where we think, first of all, that needs to be encouraged. Keep it up, and don't let up on those efforts to persuade and to message, and to affect policy change. But also, our legislators at state and federal levels also need to really understand how higher ed works, why institutional autonomy matters, why tenure protections matter, why faculty governance matters. That these are not just that these actually are pillars of of democracy and pillars of encouraging inquiry and free thought and discovery. And it keeps that space of discovery, uh, debate, critical thinking wide open and free from all kinds of possible political repression that we've seen over and over and over again in this country's history. And those things matter. And they're hard to describe. They're hard to make people understand how they work and why they matter. But we need to be doing that too.
Kathy, could I build on that? Just,
Please.
I'm thinking about the 1940 AAUP statement about academic freedom. This is kind of the canonical text that a lot of us go back to. But very clearly there, and this resonates with what you're saying here, that institutions of higher education are conducted for the common good and not to further the interest of either the individual teacher or the institution as a whole. The common good depends upon the free search for truth and its free exposition, end quote. So this has been very clearly thought about and talked about for decades and decades. But as we talk to legislators and advocate outside of the university walls, I think making the case that college is that engine, and our country needs both college graduates as well as skilled tradespeople. It is not that college is the only path out there, but it can help local economies. It can help prepare our young people for real world jobs in very tangible ways to solve problems and adapt quickly, work in teams, all of the skills that we know that employers in a given state are going to prize. So there is the message about what academic freedom is and why it matters for the common good. And at the end of the day, I think also what is very persuasive is a state's economy and the bottom line, and allowing a state to thrive. And I think both messages matter quite a lot.
All right. Well, that was really interesting and provocative. I mean, I just was frustrated with what I took to be when they were talking about what people should do, what this organization is striving to do, and what they're recommending that people in higher education do. I heard a lot of vague words that, we're in disarray. We need to communicate, come together, clear the way, claim the narrative. And I'm just thinking, how would you know if you accomplish that? There's nothing about those words that give you a sense of concreteness, of specificity, of objectives even. And I find that very frustrating. And given the kind of where we are with regards to, the crisis in which we find ourselves, I don't know that, clearing the way, claiming the narrative is what we should be focusing on as our goals.
I hear you. I mean, you're just kind of like what I hear you saying is you are bringing a knife to a gunfight with
Exactly. Yeah.
these fancy words about engagement and communication. But what I hear them saying is that we have to defend institutions. That we have the reason why students across the world flock to the United States is because, for many reasons, but in part, what makes our university so good and higher education so good is because we have academic freedom and we've had institutional autonomy, right? And so somebody has to defend those things. History shows, other countries shows that you can have a university of blank that does not actually do the work of walking toward truth, but instead is a arm of the government, right? Which is not a way to walk toward truth. What I hear them say is we have to take responsibility, um, and we have to show up. People have to show up and they have to witness what other people are saying so that they don't feel gaslit. What I hear them saying is that we have to remember professional ethics, that the way that we got here was to build over time a um, a way of being so that we can do the hard work that is necessary for finding out what causes diabetes or autism or obesity or racism or anti-Semitism or sexism or whatever. That we have to believe in truth. And we are in a situation where like people are, I mean, go back to 2016. Kellyanne Conway shows up talking about alternative facts. That is not a way to be. And so, like, we are in the situation where people are living totally different lives in their media landscapes. And somebody has to be there to say, you can believe what you want to believe, but facts are facts and we can work toward the truth. So, yeah, like communicate and come together. But what I also hear is defend solidarity, um, and stand up for the things that made us the
The
place
envy
that
of the
people want to
world,
come
right?
all over the world.
Yeah.
So,
And that's why foreign students come here. Even students from authoritarian countries come here because they know the value of critical thinking and independent thinking and being self-critical, right? And that's the kind of thing that you are taught in an American university far more. You're far more likely to be taught that there than anywhere else. I I I I grant that. I feel like the arguments, need to be a little bit more well, no, need to be significantly more, hard-edged than they are.
I'd be curious to know, Chris, what you think would be good strategies in this moment that like what is the gun in the like, fire meets fire. Like what does that what do you think that looks like?
Think that a lot all right, here's what I would do. I think the, the response of the Georgetown Law School dean was very powerful and appropriate. And, he just said, "I'm not one bit of this." They said, "Unless you" I mean, I'm this was in March, so it was a while ago. But they said, "Unless you can, prove that you are no longer having DEI policies, we will no longer hire your graduates, the Georgetown Law School graduates, in any executive agency." And he just said, "No, we're not going to do that. We're just not going to change our behavior because of you." And I think that is a stiff response, And you can argue all over the place that Georgetown law is a unique beast, and that, if you're in LSU or, University of Tennessee in Knoxville, that you have different problems. I get that. And I'm perfectly willing um, to acknowledge that, not every strategy is going to work everywhere. But if it were me, I would say, first of all, the strategy of administrations to say, we're going to keep our heads down and hope that he doesn't come after us is not a good strategy. And you know, there is a much better, I mean, maybe it won't even work, but at least you have the satisfaction of doing the right thing, which is to say, no, we're not doing this. This is wrong. And you have no right to be stepping in where you have no expertise. We're going to do what we want. And we're going to continue to provide a level of sophisticated education that is going to make a difference in the world. And if you don't like it, pound sand. I would like that. I would like to see more universities taking that kind of response.
Yeah, I'm going to put my administrator hat on, which I'm just going to borrow because I'm not in administration anymore.
Well, you have a
And
lot more experience with them than I do. So
and so I think that what somebody in administration would say is, my job is to ensure that this institution that has been alive for 150 or 200 years continues to be alive. Now, of course, like the callback, the feedback there is, yeah, under what circumstances,
Yeah.
right? Like, what is it that you're doing inside of there? So just to say that, I think that some people would say that the things that we're doing is so that we can continue to do the work as best as we can in the situation that we can. I think you're right, Chris, that, back to the example that you get about like trying different things. I think that we see that doing nothing, keeping one's head down is not a good strategy. That fully acquiescing is also not a good strategy. That implementing policies to undermine your own institution before anyone asks you to do that is also not a good thing to do. I think, though, that what's happening with with the Stand Together group is, let's try to figure out what does work. Maybe, what can we do? What is possible? How can we orient ourselves toward answering a problem within very constrained boundaries? So I hear what you're saying is like, okay, well, let's be like really like, let's talk about this like with our whole chest. And let's be really clear about why we're doing it this way. And just to bring it back to our earlier conversation, was that the moment that we're in is unprecedented in the United States. And so knowing what exactly to do is hard to know, but we're learning day by day what not to do. And I think testing the waters, experimenting, I mean, that is our own language as, scientists and scholars, is to like try it, see if it works, assess, pivot, try something new.
That's I mean, it's always such a pleasure arguing with Candace. I like it more when we disagree because because I always end up learning more as a result. Um, I think what this conversation speaks to is just how complicated, difficult, um, how much is at stake in this conversation. And, I mean, it is not by any means clear what's the right strategy. And it requires conversations like this. And I will say that Stand Together you know, is part of that conversation and deserves credit for that.